Okay, so before I get into today's video, on the off chance that there is anyone out there who's not heard of the case of Jack and Lily Sullivan, I'll just give you a quick rundown. So Jack and Lily are 4 and 6. Jack is 4, Lily is 6. And they're from Nova Scotia in an area called Pictou County. On Friday the 2nd of May, they were reported missing by their parents. The story that has been put out there by the parents is that they were in their bedroom, possibly in bed, with their 18-month-old baby, and apparently Lily and Jack were playing in the living room area. They claim Lily stuck her head into their bedroom a few times, and they told the kids to be quiet because the baby was sleeping. Then, according to their story, sometime later they suddenly realised that there was no noise, and they went looking for the kids and they couldn't find them anywhere. But they somehow know that these children let themselves out through a sliding glass door at the rear of the house and then wandered off into the woods, having left their backyard. This is my third video on this case, and I have created a playlist. If you're not familiar with the case, I recommend having a look at my first video, which is the one you can see on screen now, the Vanished into the Woods. That has a rundown of the case. You have some news stories, interviews with the parents, and the news conference that was held last week. Now, I'm going to name and shame, and it seems to be the theme at the moment with this particular case, but I'm somewhat disgusted by some of the creators that are covering this case. It seems like all the clickbaiters, all the dishonest, all the people who are just basically in it for the money have come out of the woodwork for this case. And these two channels are two of them. Last week, Paula, Plunder True Crime, went through a paid version of Broadcastify. If you're not familiar with Broadcastify, it is basically the dispatch calls, and you put in the area and you can listen back over, or you can listen to dispatch calls. You can pay a membership, which allows you to go back and listen to calls from a particular date. So Paula basically has membership with Broadcastify, and she went and downloaded 48 hours worth of audio, dispatch calls, which she then went through, pulled out all the calls that weren't relevant to the case, got rid of all the gaps, like all the breaks, put them all together in an audio, and released them as a video. Now, because Paula has been stung before by people who steal her content when she's actually paid for it, she has a watermark, an audio watermark, which she uses with audio that she has sourced independently. Now, Paula is a really lovely person, and she's got no problems with fair use. In other words, making use of her audio if you are using it for commentary, and giving her credit for it, acknowledging that that is the source, or using portions of that audio and giving her credit. But that's not what these two creators have done. It starts with Evil Exists. He copied Paula's audio, he separated the tracks, and he thought that he had removed all the audio watermarks. But he didn't. When you get to roughly the 11-minute, 12-minute mark, you hear slightly more faintly than what you would normally hear on Paula's channel, Paula's watermark. Plunder, true crime, audio. Clear as day. He basically lifted the entire audio that she'd spent all that time working on, that she had got via her paid subscription, and uploaded it as his own video. As you can see, as of the time that I'm making this, that video has had 19,000 views. I'm not entirely certain of what that equates to, but at the very least, that's several $100s worth of income right there from stolen audio. I actually made a comment on his video saying basically that I was disappointed to see that he had stolen Paula's audio and that actually he hadn't removed all the watermarks. His claim was, it's all over the internet. If I knew the source, I would credit the source. Funny thing is, when that went up, it wasn't all over the internet. It was only in one source, that source being Paula. He hadn't credited any source, so supposedly it just magically appeared on his computer and he didn't question it. Today, another creator, one that I've never heard of, Clutch Them Pearls, did the dispatch audio. And I was curious. I wanted to see if it was her own audio or if it was Paula's audio. So I went to the timestamp that I knew was where I would find Paula's watermark. And sure enough, there was the watermark, Plunder, True Crime, audio. It was quieter than on Paula's channel, and one part of it on her one had been removed. So she had basically stolen audio from Evil Exists, who stole it from Paula, and uploaded it as her own, as a video of just the dispatch audio. Honestly, this is pretty poor behaviour. These people did this. They didn't give credit for Paula. They didn't add any commentary. All they did was steal her audio. No link to where they got it from or anything like that. Uploaded it as their own. And are now getting views for it. And of course, earning money off it. I think this is just going to be the tip of the iceberg with this case, because I look at some of the channels that are covering this case, and there are some pretty shocking channels, I have to say. Okay, now that we're done with grifter of the day, or should I say plural, grifters of the day, let's get back to this. Now, I'm going to go through the interview that was done with the mother of these two children. I'm just going to say up front that I've been a little bit reluctant simply because of the amount of attention that this case is getting. So I feel the pressure to get it right, basically, because I am concerned that if I misinterpret something, that others are going to run with it, and it could be damaging for the mother. But I'm going to jump in and I'm going to have a go, and I'm just going to give that warning that this is basically me sharing my opinions based on analysing her speech and analysing her body language. Nobody is 100% accurate when it comes to analysing speech or analysing body language, so I think it's really important to keep that in mind, and also to use a bit of your own critical thinking and logic. You may disagree with me, and you may be correct. I'm certainly not claiming to be right every time. So on that note, let's jump in and have a look at this interview with the mother of these two children.
I'm just staying as hopeful as possible. I want them home. I want to hold them. And I want them home.
Okay, so just a quick heads up for those of you who are not familiar with my channel. The background noises that you may hear are my chihuahuas going crazy, zooming around the house, playing chasings. You may also hear the occasional puppy bark as they have their moment of insanity. Now, before I really get into the nitty-gritty of it, I am going to say that my first impression of this mother is that she is in distress. She has, after making those statements, and I'll come back to them, you can see that there is those lines appearing on her brow, which are an indicator of distress. You can see the pinched mouth, and also the chin has come up. She's also, having said those statements, basically closed her eyes or looked down. It appears that they are closed. She does appear to have some redness around her nose and her cheeks, but obviously, not really knowing her, we can't be 100% certain on that. She also does appear to possibly have some blotchiness on her neck, red blotchiness that sometimes occurs when people are distressed. Now, I'm going to address this initial statement that she's made before I add on to what I saw with the body language, because they are intertwined. And that is the first thing that you notice, in that her facial gestures match her language. So here she said that I want them home, I want to hold them, I want them home. There was a pause before repeating I want them home. My concern here is that it truly appeared that after saying I want them home and I want to hold them, that with that pause she was trying to think what else to say and just simply repeated I want them home. I would expect to hear at this point in time a mother mentioning how afraid she is, mentioning that she hopes they're okay, that she hopes they're safe, but we don't hear that. What we hear before the I want them home and I want to hold them is I'm staying as hopeful as possible. This is, I believe, day 1 or day 2. And yes, you do have to stay hopeful. But when a child is missing, quite often parents will think the worst, and they, rather than saying, I'm staying as hopeful as possible, they are more likely to say, I'm trying to be as hopeful as I can. And then you hear a but statement, but I'm afraid that I might not see my children again. Or, but I'm worried that they've hurt themselves. She's not showing any display of fear for the welfare of her children. Now, while this is going on, we're seeing a few telltale signs. She has this increased blink rate, which shows distress. After she says, I want them home, she closes her eyes. And when she finishes saying, I want to hold them, she very distinctly looks away. She actually moves her whole head and looks away. Now, when she actually says for the second time, I want them home, and she's looking at the reporter initially, before she looks down, you can see this look on her face in terms of the way she's got her lips pursed. It's asymmetrical. You're not seeing the same thing on both sides. When you see that, it tends to be a sign of deception. Now, it does appear, when you look at her face, that she is distressed. But at the same time, I'm seeing signs of deception. Her language is not what I would expect from a mother who should be absolutely terrified for their children about now. And her body language, you have this increased blink rate showing anxiety. Something is not right here. Closing her eyes after I want them home. I could imagine that she probably does want them home. But to me, there's something going on here. I can't help thinking that perhaps she knows that they're not coming home. Particularly given that she looks away when she says, I want to hold them. Both those things are signs that there is something here that she's not saying, some kind of deception. There's definitely more to this story. There's definitely more that this mother is saying. And I can't help thinking that given the rather shallow statements, given her not commenting here about being in fear over what's happening to her children, being terrified that they might be hurt or anything else like that. There's no comments here about concern for their welfare at all. To me, that says that they're not coming back. She knows they're not coming back. I mean, let's call a spade a spade. Yes, she appears distressed, but she's not crying. Maybe she's desperately trying to hold it all in, but there's certainly no tears. There's no snot. I know that sounds a bit gross, but, you know, it is a classic thing that you hear from detectives. Basically, no snot means they're not crying. And I think the biggest red flag for me is her repeating, I want them home, when it appears that she's done so because she can't think of what else to say. If your children were genuinely missing, you didn't know where they are, and there was some hope of them coming home, you would have so much more to say. Like I said, it would be at this point that you would be expressing your fears for the welfare. You would be expressing your fears that you might not ever see them again. Not what she's saying here.
What happened was we woke up, I heard them playing in the next room beside us, and I was drifting in and out of sleep. And they're not the type of kids that we tell them not to go outside on their own. We always make sure that we're out there with them, watching them.
Now, one thing I'm very conscious of here is that I don't know her baseline. We can tell that this is a family that comes from a somewhat low socio-economic background, meaning that it is possible that she does not have a high level of education. We are led to believe that the children both may have autism. The reason they're saying may have is because at their age, it would be a tentative diagnosis. I would imagine. I'm surprised that Lily hasn't been fully diagnosed, but maybe they're waiting for her to turn 8. But when it comes to neurodivergence, such as autism, ADHD, it has been found that it is a genetic disorder, meaning that if you have a child who has autism or ADHD, there's a good chance that they are going to have a parent or an aunt or uncle who also struggles with the same issue. So there could also be issues with this mother in terms of autism or ADHD. So we just have to keep those things in mind when we are listening to her speech. But here's the things that stand out for me. From the very get-go, what happened was, this is not natural speech. This is written language. This is perhaps what you might see when someone is providing a written statement for police as to what has happened with their children going missing. This is not what you would expect to hear in terms of natural speech from a parent talking to media. Like I said, we do have to keep in mind that this could go back to her educational or socio-economic background, but it does not sound natural. The other big thing that I noticed here is that she's gone from making I statements to we and us. It is now everything to do with both of them together. They're not the type of kids that we tell them not to go outside on their own. We always make sure that we're out there with them, watching them. So when I hear someone slip into we statements, I think about, just for example, Jen Soto, when she was sharing the Stephen Stearns story. We dropped her off at school. Well, we know that Jen actually didn't even get out of bed. To me, when I hear the we statements, that is indicating that it is a made-up story, and that it is most likely a story that's been concocted by the two people that are being referred to. So to me, it does sound like this is a made-up story that has basically been put together by both her and the stepfather. The other thing I'm hearing here is there's a little bit of virtue signalling. We're good parents. We always make sure that we're outside with them and that they know they're not allowed to go outside without us. Clearly, the intention here is to give the listener the impression that they are always super, super responsible parents, and this has never ever happened before. It is something completely out of the ordinary, and usually they are so hypervigilant in their parenting that this is such a rarity for it to occur. The thing is, when I hear this added into a story, when we're hearing about missing children and parents start having to point out the fact that they are good parents, that is immediately a red flag for me. Sure, if it's come up as a question in terms of have they been known to head off outdoors on their own or head off on little exploration missions in the past, then I would expect to hear this sort of information. But this is something that she has offered up unprompted, and to me, that makes it seem a little less genuine. It certainly is a red flag to me. In terms of how she's speaking here, it sounds like a recitation. Like I said, the start of it sounds contrived. Starting with what happened was. But the thing is, there's not really a natural cadence here. We're not hearing the usual pauses in the speech. It's just a straight recitation. So much so that there's been confusion from people over what she was trying to say here. Because she says they're not the type of kids that we tell them not to go outside on their own. No pauses or anything. And I think that's one of the main things that people have been discussing. Had she said it more naturally, they're not the type of kids that we tell them not to go outside on their own. We always make sure. So you're not getting those pauses in her speech. It is just a straight through recitation. That to me, again, is a concern. There's also no change in the intonation. It's a really flat tone. So we don't hear increased or decreased pitch. It's just straight out. They're not the kids, they're not the type of kids that we tell them not to go outside on their own. And I just went up a bit there because it's natural speech. But it is very, very flat in terms of intonation. I do think it's important, though, to recognise here that she does have a good level of communication skills. She's communicating quite clearly and doesn't seem to be struggling with any sort of grammatical issues. So to me, she comes across as being quite intelligent, which again makes the way that she's speaking a little bit concerning.
And they happen to just get out that sliding door and we can't hear it when it opens. And they were outside playing, but we weren't aware of it at the time. And the next thing we knew, it was quiet. And we get up and I tell him, my partner, Daniel, I tell him, do you hear the kids? And he says, no. And we get up instantly. We're looking outside. We're looking everywhere, yelling for them. And I instantly just call 911. I just had the instinct I needed to call.
Okay, I'm going to be upfront. I hope that the behaviour panel takes a look at this interview because there's a lot of micro reactions going on here that, for me, I've watched it a few times and I'm sure I've missed a lot. Now, the first thing that's really clear here is that now that she's into the narrative phase, we're not showing any signs of distress, any signs of being upset. And I'll come back to that in a moment. So we get the continued story. They happen to get out the sliding door and we can't hear it when it opens. While she's saying that, as she says they happen to get out the sliding door, we get a really brief shake of the head. It's not even a full shake of the head, it's just a half shake of the head. And honestly, if you blinked, you would miss it.
They happened to just get out that sliding door. And
I'm just going to point out, though, that she does shake her head a lot during this interview. So it could just be the way that she moves when she's communicating. But it's certainly something just to be aware of here. The head shake when she's talking about them getting out the sliding door could in fact mean that they did not go out that sliding door. She also says, when she says about them being outside playing and says we weren't aware of it at the time, she does do a shake of the head, but it's kind of a crooked shake. It's not quite your standard no kind of shake. So I'm wondering if that's just part of, like I said, the way she moves when she's communicating, or if it's a bit similar to when you see asymmetrical facial expressions. It doesn't quite line up. Is it that she is referring to a time when they've been outside and they've not been aware of it? Does all this actually fit together for that actual morning? Or have there been instances when they have gotten outside and been playing and they weren't aware? I'm really not sure. Then she actually goes on to talk about the next thing we know, and she starts saying the room, and she changes it to it was quiet. But she is very definitely shaking her head when she says it was quiet. She also shakes her head when she's talking about we get up instantly, and she instantly calls 911. She's doing a lot of head shaking while she's saying this. If we line it up with the things she's saying, yes, it could be that those things are untruthful in terms of the last couple of ones where she says we get up instantly and shakes her head. She also mentions looking outside, she's shaking her head again, and talking about instantly calling 911 and shaking her head. I also wonder, though, if while the shaking of heads definitely matches the language, I wonder if there's also some sort of indication here with the amount of shaking of her head that she's doing that this story is in fact made up. Now, with regards to what she's saying here, again, we're getting the we statements. We can't hear the sliding door when it opens, and we weren't aware of it at the time. Next thing, we knew it was quiet. It still, to me, does not ring like someone describing events. It sounds to me like someone basically reciting a memorised story. It is very much like I went to the shop and I bought an orange, and then the next person goes, I went to the shop, I bought an orange and I bought a lemon. And the next person is, I went to the shop, I bought an orange, a lemon and a banana. That sort of thing. It still has the feel of a story that she is trying to remember as opposed to a retelling of events. Now, it's interesting the way she reacts when she talks about the stepfather, because she says, I tell him, and there's a pause before she adds my partner, and there's another pause before she says his name, Daniel. And while she's doing that, before she says that, there's this big intake of breath before she starts saying that. She clenches her lips after saying I tell him in an asymmetrical way, which usually, to me, it appears that she is showing contempt. Certainly there was no love between these two when she was doing this interview. And after she says, my partner pauses and says, Daniel, she closes her eyes. Definitely referring to him as her partner is not something that is coming easily to her. There is clearly something major going on here between the apparent sign of contempt, the reluctance to even refer to him as anything other than him. It's a struggle. You get this pause when she comes out with my partner, and another pause before she spits out his name. She's not loving this guy at this point in time. As for what she's saying here, there's a few things that I find kind of interesting. Again, it definitely sounds like more of a narrative than a retelling. We're getting a lot of over-explaining, a lot of offering justifications. They know that the kids got out that door, and they're saying we can't hear it when it opens. That is basically justifying, this is how come they got outside and we're not responsible. We didn't know that they got out because we didn't hear it. But she's certainly over-explaining. She's drifting in and out of sleep, and they go out and they play, and they weren't aware that the kids were playing outside. Well, how do you know that they were actually playing outside if you weren't even aware that they'd gone outside? For all you know, they could have just gone outside and wandered off. So she's adding a lot of extra detail, things that I would not expect to hear in terms of what actually happened. I would expect, for starters, to hear, we think they might have got out through the sliding door because we don't normally hear that. Not a positive, we know this. We were asleep, we weren't paying any attention, but we know this is what happened. There's also issues with the flow of what she's saying here. She's saying that, they were saying all that, they're outside playing all this stuff. She says, the next thing we know, starts with the room, it was quiet, and we get up. So essentially, she's placing that after the kids have gone outside and have been playing. it's not in agreement with the story. I would expect to hear something along the lines of, we'd heard the kids playing, they were being kind of noisy, and then everything went quiet. We didn't realise, but that was because they'd gone outside. But instead, she has them going outside and playing before everything suddenly goes quiet. And I know that sounds like a little bit of nitpicking, but if you are doing a natural retelling, then that's how I would expect to hear it. And she still is getting out of order, because after it's gone quiet and after they get up, she says, I tell him, do you hear the kids? And he says, no. And we get up instantly. So she's backtracked. She's rearranged her story slightly. She's basically not retelling things in a linear manner. Now, sure, if you are doing a retelling, there'll be times when you'll say something and then you backtrack and say, actually, when this happened. But the way that she is doing this, in terms of having the kids going outside and playing, then it goes quiet, then they get up, and then she says to him, do you hear them? And then they instantly get up. It's not linear. It's not real. She's not adding to the narrative when she does this backtracking and side swinging and everything. She's just confusing what she's saying and not retelling it in a linear fashion. That is a huge red flag for me. Certainly makes me think that this story is definitely not what occurred. The other thing that I find to be a huge red flag is that it reads like a written story. She doesn't say that she asked Daniel if she heard them. Instead, she says it like you would expect to read it in a story. I tell him, and we add in the speech marks, do you hear the kids? And he says, speech marks, no. This definitely to me has the sound of a story as opposed to someone actually recounting what has occurred, a retelling. It just does not sound real to me. It sounds like this is a story that has been made up between them, hence the everything with the we statements, because basically the only time we get her referring to herself, I or him, is when she starts using the speech. I tell him, do you hear the kids? And he says no. Then she straight away goes back to the we statements. We get up instantly. We're looking outside. We're looking everywhere. So again, we're back to the we statements. I would expect, if you were panicked, that at that point in time, once you got up and you were starting to panic, that basically you would take on different roles. Something like, well, I went and double checked in their bedroom and Daniel went outside and called them. But it's all we, so it really does sound like this story is just not real. And then here's where it gets interesting, because she's just said that they're looking outside, they're looking everywhere, they're yelling for them. And then she says, And I instantly just called 911 as just, and there's a pause, I just had the instinct I needed to call. Instantly for me is problematic because that is more what you would expect in written language in a narrative, in a fictional story. But to say that she has instantly called 911 when she's just given the opposite account, because she said we instantly got up and then they were looking everywhere. They were looking outside, they were looking everywhere, they were yelling for them. So everything is happening instantly. But you can't be instantly calling 911 while you are also looking outside and looking everywhere and yelling for them. Okay, this is not a technical term that you're actually going to hear from any other, well, from any analyst. I wouldn't necessarily consider myself to be an analyst. I'm just saying what I observe. But we're getting the hero persuasive speech happening here. They instantly get up. They're looking everywhere. She instantly calls 911. This is that whole giving the impression of we did everything right. We did all these things, all these important things, are trying to convey this sense of urgency, but it just doesn't sound genuine. It sounds instead like someone who is trying to be overly persuasive, especially when you have these mismatches of instantly calling 911 while at the same time you happen to be looking outside, looking everywhere and yelling. Honestly, I'm just not buying it. She's over explaining and she's trying to be overly convincing.
They're both really go-lucky children. They're so sweet. They talk to anyone. They'll talk your ear off. They will speak to anyone in a store. Everyone. They're just extremely sweet kids.
Now, first of all, I've never heard someone say they're really go-lucky children without leaving the happy part out. I think this is possibly just an error on her part, perhaps. She's tried to get it out and just missed that part. Because, you know, the whole notion of being happy-go-lucky is, you know, not a care in the world. You just take life as it comes, that sort of thing. But it certainly sounds odd to hear it said they're both really go-lucky children. To me, that suggests that this is not a description that she's normally used for her children, because otherwise it tends to just trip off the lips pretty easily, as opposed to coming out slightly incorrect. And then she goes on to talk about them being sweet. They talk to anyone, they'll talk your ear off. They'll speak to anyone in a store. And then she goes, everyone, just to emphasise. And then pause, and then they're just, and I think she was going to say they're just sweet. But then she pauses and she goes, extremely sweet kids. Now, before I comment on that, I'm going to backtrack to when I first got the oldest of my two chihuahuas, Amira, she's 7 years old now. When I got her, I was actually on a road trip. And of course, being an 8-week-old chihuahua meant that she was little small to wear a harness. And like I said, I was on a road trip, so I was stopping at various places. And I learnt very quickly that I had to keep a hold of her anytime I went anywhere near any children, because she came from a home where they had 5 children and she loves children. And she would immediately dash over to say hello to the kids, and I would have to go and retrieve her. Why am I saying that? Because I'm giving that explanation of I had to make sure that I hung on to her, because otherwise she just had to go and speak to everyone. I'm giving that justification for why in some locations I couldn't allow her down for a bit of a run. So what am I getting at here? Well, both her and the stepfather have been really pushing the belief that the children have been abducted. And that's the sense I get here, that these children are so outgoing around strangers that they are at risk if they're not being watched. They'll talk to anyone. They'll talk your ear off. And they'll speak to anyone in a store. And then she clarifies that with everyone. They won't just speak to anyone in the store, but they'll speak to everyone. They'll go into the store and they will speak to every single person that they encounter. She's creating the image here of children who have no fear, no sense of stranger danger, no inhibition. Children who would be perfect targets for any would-be abductor. Now, I'm guessing that the question that was asked of her is, what are they like? And this is what she's come out with. She really hasn't given much. If you've seen the birthday video of them, we can see that Lily is a bit of a live wire. She's a bit of a squealer, and she's a bit of a bouncer. She's certainly very, very lively. And that's just from observing a 10-second video. But the only quality that we're being told here is that they'll talk your arm off, basically. They'll talk to anyone and everyone. That is the only quality we are being told for these kids. And when you couple that with this insistence from both parents that these children have been abducted, that to me is a huge red flag.
I appreciate the huge search effort going on right now, but we've been pushing for an Amber Alert, which hasn't been issued. Not just that they could possibly be abducted, which it is a possibility that they could have been, but just an alert to let everyone know that they are missing. We had people text me saying that they weren't aware, someone else let them know that they were missing, and it would just be nice if everyone could be alerted.
So she pauses a lot while she's saying that first bit, and not at natural interview. So I appreciate the huge search effort, because going on right now, pause, but we've been pushing pause for an Amber Alert, which hasn't been pause issued. Now, when she said that, she appreciates search effort that's going on, But we've been pushing for an Amber Alert, which hasn't been issued. Now, an Amber Alert is used for an abduction. If a child is believed to have gone missing from wandering off into the woods, of course they're not going to use an Amber Alert. And when I heard her say this, it brought another interview to mind from a number of years back, and I'm wondering if you guys thought the same thing.
We have to do one step at a time, I guess, but I'm sorry that they had to spend so many man hours in these woods and everything. I've seen them limping and everything else, you know, and I feel for them.
It's that certainty that searching out in the woods is a waste of time. Because that's what Don Wells was implying with Summers' case as well. This whole, we are so positive that it's an abduction, that while we're grateful for the search, we're disappointed because there isn't an Amber Alert. But the thing is, if your child is missing, you're going to be looking at every possibility. You're not going to turn around and say you don't want them looking out in the woods, because for all you know, your kids could be out there lost in the woods. You're not going to poo-poo it and say, well, you know, this is great, but I wish they'd do an Amber Alert, when there's absolutely no evidence of an abduction. And that's the thing. The reason there has been no Amber Alert issued is because there's been no evidence of an abduction. Law enforcement have stated that extremely clearly. But here we get the criticism of, you know, I appreciate the search, but we've been pushing for an Amber Alert that hasn't been issued. And then she comes out with this weird statement. It's not just that they could possibly be abducted, which it is a possibility that they could have been, but just an alert to let everyone know that they're missing. She's got to be extra persuasive. It's a possibility. It is a possibility. I want you to believe that it's a possibility. And she's saying, you know, I want this alert to go out because I want everyone to know they're missing. But the thing is, we are looking at 3 scenarios here. These children got lost in the woods. These children were abducted, or there was some sort of criminal activity, some kind of foul play. We've been told it was not an abduction. That means we're looking at the children either being lost in the woods or foul play, meaning that letting everyone know that the children are missing is really not going to make a huge difference to the outcome, other than bringing people forward with tips. So why is it important to her to make sure that people know that the children are missing? She answers that, and it's not the answer that I would have expected. She says, we had people telling me, saying they weren't aware, someone else let them know. In other words, the issue here is she wants the public to know that the children are missing, so that she doesn't have to contact people and let people know that the children are missing. She's not saying, I want the public to know about it just in case somebody sees them. Her number one concern here is that people she knows hadn't heard about it and were contacting her to say that they hadn't heard about it. So if an alert went out, then that wouldn't happen. There's no plea here for the Amber Alert to go out just in case someone might see them. It's all about wanting the Amber Alert out so that people aren't going to be contacting her about the kids being missing. There's no plea for, I want the public to know just in case somebody knows anything or somebody sees anything. We don't hear that from her. Nothing in this interview is really showing a concern for the kids being found.
We thought maybe that we found tracks, but it's still uncertain. It's been raining and they're probably soaking wet, but with the sun today, I'm hopeful that they are feeling warm.
Now, I haven't been able to find exactly what day the mother gave this interview. I have found that the father gave his interview on the Sunday, but I am going to say, at the very least, that she did not give this interview on the same day that the children was missing. Because first of all, she talks about these tracks that they found, but they're uncertain about. Well, these tracks were supposedly up towards the back of the backyard. If they are claiming these children were abducted, then the tracks are in the wrong spot. But those tracks are totally irrelevant anyway. They were proven to be insignificant. They did a massive search around there and came up with nothing else. But moving on for that, she says it's been raining and they're probably soaking wet. But with the sun today, I'm hopeful that they're feeling this warm, a pause, and then she says warm. So I think she is actually speaking at least the following day. Now, here's the thing. She's way too matter-of-fact about them being raining, or about it raining and them probably being soaking wet. She doesn't express any concern over that. She doesn't express any concern of, I hope they found somewhere to shelter out of the rain. I hope they're not hypothermic. There's no real concern over them having gotten wet. There's no concern over them possibly spending the night out in the cold, soaked through. Because that would be a huge concern for me, but she's not voicing any concern. She said, but with the sun today, I'm hopeful that they're feeling warm. So, not hopeful that their clothes have dried out and now that they've warmed up, but just hopeful that they're warm. It just really doesn't ring true with me at all. I would expect any mother whose child has been missing out in the rain to be absolutely beside themselves. And not to be just going, oh, well, hopefully now they're warm because it was sunny. You would expect, like I said, the concerns over, I hope they found somewhere to shelter. I hope they haven't ended up with hypothermia. I hope they've managed to get dry. And what about the concerns for they've not had anything to eat now for 24 hours? They must be hungry, they must be cold. They must be feeling miserable after getting soaking wet. It really does not ring true to me at all. I think she knows that those children aren't or weren't out there in the woods. So there isn't that concern for their welfare. the fact that it rained is just a factual thing to her, and she's tried to make it sound basically that it's an issue. Someone's probably mentioned, wow, it's soaking wet out there, and so she's added that to her narrative. But it really doesn't sound like it's something that is remotely concerning for her. What she's saying here just does not sound genuine in the least.
We're all filled with pain and sorrow because we just want them found. We want them home. Everyone loves them.
This has got to be one of the biggest red flags in the interview. This is not a mother pleading for her children to be found safe. This is not a mother pleading for her children to be brought home. She's saying we are all filled with pain and sorrow, as we just want them found. We want them home. Everybody loves them. This is not remotely what you would hear from a mother who genuinely has no idea what's happened to her children and is actually pleading for them to be returned home. We don't once hear her say, I'm filled with dread, I'm just desperate to get my children home. I just really need them back with me. I need to know they're okay. None of those things. It's the we, whoever we are. And it's we are all. It's not just we as in her and her de facto, but it's like a global all. It's a whole bunch of people. She's speaking on behalf of a whole bunch of people, but not on behalf of herself. So that really, really is a huge red flag for me. It does not ring true. This is not a genuine statement. She is not expressing any genuine concern, any genuine need to have her children returned. And to say we are all filled with pain and sorrow. Sorrow is what you feel when someone is deceased and you know they are not coming back. When a child is missing, yes, you may be filled with pain, but you're not going to be filled with sorrow. You're going to be anxious. You may be angry if there is evidence of an abduction. But you are not going to be filled with sorrow unless you know that child is deceased. This is not the language of a parent who believes that her children have simply gone missing and need to be found.
They are definitely verbal, and they do have possible autism, but it's not extreme autism. It's just they have issues with school, and they don't catch up with the other kids.
This statement makes me incredibly sad. She says they're definitely verbal, possibly autistic, but not like extreme autism. She says that they have issues with school, they don't catch up with the other kids. So, here's the thing. What I'm seeing, just at a glance, is a family that has been struggling. This is a family with 3 young kids under the age of 7. A family who clearly have been doing it tough financially. A family whose kids are not performing as they should at school. There can be all manner of reasons for that, and when you add into that the suspicion of autism, that says to me that things aren't right in this home. Things have not been right in this home for some time. Yes, we can judge on the yard being in chaos, and it really doesn't look like a great yard for kids to be in. But what does all this mean? These are all signs of a family in crisis. And my question is this: regardless of what the issue was that was causing these children to struggle at school, whether there is a family violence issue, whether it is just a poverty issue, whether it is just simply a family that is struggling because they have 3 young children and that's got to be hard work, or whether there is mental health concerns, whatever it is, this family has been struggling, and this family has been struggling from a long time. And I'm just wondering, how did it get to this point where now 2 of those 3 children are gone? Did no one notice? Did no one question what could be the reason behind these children struggling at school? Did no one take the time to speak to the parent, to the mother, and say, look, is there any way we can help you? Is there anything that you need? Because apparently there is this rumour that the other child has now been taken by protective services. Well, that's just a little bit too late. It shouldn't come to a point where things come to a head and then protective services step in and take the most extreme action. Something should have happened beforehand. Whatever the problems were that this family was going through should have been identified and addressed. Maybe the mother needed help getting out of a abusive relationship. Maybe they just needed help learning how to cope with this family, 3 young kids. But they needed help. And they instead got left to their own devices, and look where it's come to. So hearing her talking about these children not performing at school and being behind the other children at school, when I look at that alongside everything else that we know about that family, it makes me both sad and angry. I know people say, oh, we don't want to interfere. They look at this family that's struggling and they don't want to become involved. This is what happens when people don't become involved. This is what happens when people look the other way, or people just judge and say, well, these people are beneath me, I'm just going to ignore them. I'm not saying that this excuses anything that may have happened, anything that these parents may have done, but I am saying that as a society, we need to do better. We need to pay attention when 2 children from the same family are struggling at school. and are not making the same benchmarks that other children their age are achieving. That is a huge red flag.
I just want to remain hopeful. But there's always, in a mother's mind, you're always thinking the worst.
Again, this just does not sound right to me. She starts with, I just want to remain hopeful. I'm not sure what the I'm just was going to be. Maybe it was I'm just hopeful that something. But I just want to remain hopeful. When you say you want to, that means you're not really. I just want to remain hopeful, but actually I'm not. I would expect to hear, I'm trying to remain hopeful. I'm trying to keep my hopes up. I'm trying not to lose hope. That whole notion of, that you are afraid and you are starting to worry. But when you say, I just want to remain hopeful, that's basically just thrown it all out the window. I want to remain hopeful, but yeah, I'm not. It's just not the language I would expect from a mother. There's no sense of desperation here. And then what she says next on the surface could sound genuine, except she's no longer talking in first person here. She's basically speaking in rather general terms. She says, but there's always pauses. In a mother's mind, you're always thinking the worst. Now that to me, the way she says it, sounds like it's something she's read on social media. Someone's probably made a comment and said that, as a mother, when your child goes missing, you're scared, but you also always thinking the worst. But she's not saying she's thinking the worst. She's not even sure what she's saying at first. But there's always. And then she changes it to in a mother's mind. Not in her mind. It's all very neutral. It's not, I'm trying to remain hopeful, but honestly, I'm struggling to not think the worst. The I statements, this is how I am feeling. She's not talking here about her thinking the worst. She's just saying that in general, as a mother, you feel the worst. You're thinking the worst. To me, that is concerning. She's really not showing any sort of emotion, but she's also not voicing any real concerns. It's like she's just repeating platitudes or repeating things that she's heard said, and there's no emotion behind these statements. There's no sense of desperation. This could be someone sitting at a table doing a read-through for a TV show before putting the acting in. It's just not convincing.
Last night was one of the worst nights because I didn't have them in their beds. And I don't want to go through that another night without them.
I'm going to play another clip in a moment, and I have no doubt that many of you are thinking of exactly the same clip that I'm thinking. But first of all, let's look at what she said. Last night was one of the worst nights because I didn't have them in their beds, and I don't want to go through that another night without them. What's the actual topic here? What is the main thing that is being said here? These are all I statements. Now, I know I said before that she was making a very general statement and she wasn't making I statements. But here, the I statements are inappropriate. Last night was one of the worst nights because I didn't have them in their beds. Who was it bad for? It was bad for her. Because she didn't have them there in their beds. And she doesn't want to go through that. She doesn't want to go through another night without them. This statement is all about her. It was horrible for her because they weren't in their beds. She doesn't want to go through that again. Now, on the surface, yes, understandable. It would be horrible for a parent to go through that. It would be horrible to not have them there in their beds. And you would be not wanting to go through that again. But that's not the sentiment that I would expect from a parent whose children are missing and is concerned for their welfare. You know, last night, I don't know where they slept. I don't know if they were warm. I don't know if they even slept. I don't know if they were hungry. I don't know if they were cold. I'm worried that should they go through another night of this, how will they cope? There is no concern expressed here at all for her children. There is no concern over them being somewhere overnight. There's not even a, I wonder where they were. I hope they were warm. I hope they were dry. I hope they're not injured. They must be hungry. None of that. It was all I statements about it was a bad experience for her. It's about how she feels and nothing to do with her children.
I needed that. I needed that last night. And for nobody to be here last night and to go into their rooms and know that I wasn't going to turn the rain machines on, and I know that I wasn't going to turn their monitor on, and know I wasn't going to kiss them to bed tonight. It was...
So, on the remote chance that anybody does not know who Chris Watts is, he unalived his 2 young children and his pregnant wife. I won't go into any more details because it is a truly horrible, horrible case. There's plenty online if you do want to find out more about it, if you've not heard about the Chris Watts case. But this is not about him, this is about Lily and Jack. So that brings us to the end of this interview with their mother. Everything I see is just red flags to me. We see a little bit of possible emotion at the beginning of the interview, but after that, it doesn't sound right. We get a lack of emotion. We get a retelling that isn't in a linear order. We get frequent use of we instead of I. Inappropriate subjects, as in like she was more worried about her going through another night with the children not being there as opposed to worrying about the children spending another night possibly outdoors in the woods. She's not voiced any genuine concerns for these children. Everything about this interview screams to me that this mother knows that her children did not wander off into the woods, and this mother knows that her children were not abducted. Couple that with the facts that we know. We've been told the children weren't abducted. We know the search was called off after only 6 days. We know that the parents are not even talking, apparently. And we've seen her reaction, her contempt, when she even just mentioned the stepfather's name. I wish I could say that I was hopeful for a positive outcome for this case, but having just gone through all this interview, having listened to what she said, I'm really not feeling hopeful at all. Now, I am going to say just in advance of doing an analysis of the stepfather, I know there's a bit of a Daniel support group out there. People who claim that, well, he offered to do a polygraph test and he didn't leave. He's still there. He went out searching. But I'm just going to say this. Regardless of his actions or claimed actions, the story that he is giving, or the story he was giving, is the same as the story that was being given by this mother. In other words, if one is in on this, both are in on this. Maybe he's searching. Maybe he's offered to do a polygraph test. Maybe he's still there at the house. But he has shared the same information as she has. Meaning they are both equally as guilty if something did occur to these children. If one or other of them did something to these children, or if they are covering up some sort of accident, then even if one of them has done nothing other than lie to cover what happened, they are still both in on this. Now, for those of you who are following my coverage of the Madeline Soto case, I will be finishing off going back over flatmate interviews in my next video. In other words, there is one interview left with the flatmate Natalie that I would like to go through and do an analysis of. So I'm aiming to make that my next video before I come back and do an analysis of the stepfather in this particular case. I will aim to try and get 2 videos out tomorrow. I will certainly make a start on Natalie's video tonight to try and get a head start. But at the very least, you will get the Madeline Soto Natalie interview analysis. But with a bit of luck, if I can organise myself well enough, you may get 2 videos tomorrow. Now, on that note, I'm going to leave it there. If you are new to my channel, please subscribe. Also, please hit the like button and leave a comment below. I'm very interested in hearing your thoughts on what has been discussed in this video today. So thank you, and I will catch you in the next one.
I've been to wonder